In the
broadcast is live.
Okay.
We are live.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Susan Fisher-Sterling, the Alice West Director of the National Museum of Women in the Arts. And I have to say, I am so honored to be able to intro this important conversation between Catherine Gunn and Teresita Fernandez. And of course, to be able to show the documentary Aggie in advance of its release this October 16th. On a personal note, I want to thank Kat and her team for creating this film that tells her mother's story. Because Agnes Gunn is a woman of such strength and valor. She was a supporter of women artists long before it was popular. She was a founding member of the National Museum of Women in the Arts. And Agnes Gunn has always had my heart, and she has tested my mettle. And I'm excited that we are able to salute her tonight. Her Art for Justice Fund is especially inspiring for us at NMWA as we have created our Women Arts and Social Change initiative to highlight the power of women in the arts as catalysts for social change. In addition, I want to recognize Susan and Jim Schwartz. Their public program fund here at NMWA helps with events like this. But tonight, they have actually played a more important role because they helped to premiere Aggie at Sundance earlier this year. And they were the ones who introduced us to Kat because they knew that this program would be perfect for our initiative. So thank you to Susan and Jim. Thank you as well to our other Women Arts and Social Change leadership sponsors, including Denise Littlefield-Sobel, the Doré Davis Family Fund, the Ravada Foundation of the Logan family, and additional support provided locally by the Bernstein Family Foundation. I am glad we're all together this evening, and now I turn the program over to our august participants. Thank you very much.
Can't hear you.
We can't hear you. Sorry. Start over.
Thank you, Susan, for your wonderful remarks and your wonderful welcome, your warm welcome, and for your leadership of the National Museum of Women in the Arts. It is a pleasure to be here. My name is Melani Douglass. I'm the Director of Public Programs, and this program is a part of the Women Art and Social Change program here at the museum. We have the pleasure today to talk to Catherine Gunn and also Teresita Fernandez. Both of them, it has been just a warm moment to be able to watch their sisterhood, to watch their family growth that has been a part and an extension of the work of Agnes Gunn. And I want to give you just some background about who they are. Catherine Gunn, she is the founder and director of Aubin Films. She is an award-winning director, Emmy-nominated producer and writer, and activist. Teresita Fernandez does beautiful work with, pardon me, I have to pull, thank you so much, does large public scale sculptures and her innovative use of materials. And throughout her practice, she really does include science, and her work touches me in a way that reflects humanity. And so I hope that you get a chance to look at her work. So I want us to have a conversation, and we're here to talk about the film Aggie, and a lot of our audience has had a chance to see it. I've had a chance to see it a few times, and I must admit that I was so impressed by the story when I first read about it. I just was blown away by the generosity of Agnes Gunn and the connectivity. So when I saw the film, what stood out to me the most was this ecosystem of care that seemed to be an extension of her personal relationships, of deeply caring for people that reached out into the care of a larger society. So I want to start with that center of the ecosystem, the personal relationships, and what bringing artists together and people from across different fields to care about the arts in a way that led to this overflow of love that led into care about other communities and social issues. So Catherine, if you could start us off with that and just lead us into that conversation, because you were saying that artists are a gift. She brought this gift to your life, and I would love to hear more.
Well, thank you. I was gonna let Teresita start it off, but it's really great to be here tonight. I love getting the opportunity to speak with my friend Teresita, and also to meet you, Melani. And um, when I think of what Aggie, someone was asking me today about what it was like to grow up with not only her as a mother, but surrounded by art. And that was when I realized that she always told us that were gifts, that the art that artists made was a gift that the artists were giving to the world. And I believe that to be true. I know that to be true, that there's a vision and there's an insistence on a different way of seeing, on a subjectivity of the artists themselves. Um, and, and so in that sense, I was saying, that Teresita is actually someone that my mother introduced me to. Sometimes I introduce her to amazing people, but here was an instance where actually she brought Teresita and I together. And it is in that relationship that Teresita and I have been able to bond over our mothering, over our children, over our relationship with Aggie, over our relationship with men, over our relationship with the art world. Obviously, we come from completely different sides, angles, perspectives, experiences when we do come together that way. But to me, the film hopefully resonates with people in the way that Aggie creates community. And that was why I did the interviews instead of interviews between me and my mother, like these talking head interviews. I had my children and artists and mutual friends and colleagues of hers conduct these conversations that were really in real time. They were real moments. They were not these sort of talking heads, like traditional staged moments. They were actually fly on the wall moments where I was recording honest conversations, where I just said, and Teresita can speak to this, where I just said to them that they could ask anything they wanted if they were up to doing these conversations, that they could speak for an hour with her or an hour and a half or whatever. And it was magical to me that they brought out all these sides of her. It became kind of these facets of Aggie, and she's such a social person, and her life really is about these relationships with people. And then someone pointed out yesterday that in a way, the interlocutors were also facets of me. And that I loved, because I think of how many people in the film are dear friends, guides, challengers, accountability partners, inspirations, and just plain beauty in my life. And that would be someone like Teresita.
Mm-hmm.
That is beautiful, and it is clearly reflected when I see how you and Teresita respond and react with each other and communicate. And Teresita, I would love to hear about what this ecosystem has created for you and brought into your life as well.
Well, I wanted to center it a little bit back on the film and Aggie, because I think that one of the really incredible things about Agnes Gunn as a human being is that she really occupies all of these liminal spaces, and she's quite unique in that. In and of itself isn't that unique, but I wanted to sort of talk about her in a way that isn't as this anomaly, but as someone who has really taken her privilege and her access with great responsibility. And she has done that in this very authentic way, which speaks to what Kat was saying, through her relationships with people. I think it's very hard to touch upon these ideas of social justice authentically without a sense of community and without a sense of learning and stumbling and listening. And these are all things that they're earned, they're hard, they're worked at. Part of that ecosystem that is modeled through Aggie and the film and this really kind of extensive network of solidarity around Art for Justice, around museum initiatives, around just so many things that can be looked at both in the interpersonal space, but also in these larger systems that we are trying to change, right? And the beautiful thing about it is that Aggie's role and the film and the way that Kat, because the film to me, and if you know Kat or Aggie in person as real people and friends, it is so much a very intimate portrait of their relationship. And even though Kat's not in the film very much, there's a kind of it's very evident that what Aggie is able to create in the world is sort of very, very much nurtured and lovingly sort of teased out by people who care about her and who are teaching her, primarily Kat, but also like some of those scenes where you see Tenzin or Sadie talking to their grandmother, and really this very deep understanding that Aggie's role and her relationship to these, big ideas of social justice really come from a very personal point of view. And I put that out there to sort of demystify the anomaly of Aggie and say that we all have the capacity to do this. We all have the capacity to understand how the personal and the political are intertwined. And this sense that if you're not indignant at everything that's happening in the world right now, you should be asking yourself why, because it should be something that's taken very, very personally. And I think that it's one of the most important things that both Aggie as a human being, but also the film really and very, very tenderly and very responsibly and very rigorously unravel for us.
I definitely feel that the film did a beautiful job of saying it had you look at the movie and look at Aggie almost and be able to say, I am Aggie as well. I can take what I have and do more. And it doesn't matter how much, yes, the amount may be different, but at the core of it, it really is taking what I have and extending it as far as I can. And there's ways that this project reaches, and there's ways that Aggie's work reaches and extends out that in the film it showed, but can you all talk to that, or to a piece about how this connection between art and justice reaches so many different communities in the schools, in the courtrooms? Can you speak to that to that a bit?
I would just start by saying that I think it relates to your last question, which is that the networks of care is something that Aggie's so concerned about, and that it really is about her connection to people and her love of people. I mean, she's sort of the original philanthropist, if you look up the word, which is the love of people. And if you look at her creation of these two seemingly very different programs of Art for Justice and Studio in a School, you can see a direct line from one to the other, which is about wanting to make sure everyone has a voice and that everyone's taken care of and that everyone can participate in their life in the civic realm and can live up to whatever their potential is, and with full imagination and critical inquiry and whatnot. And here are these children who say there is no other place in the school I'm ever asked what I think. I'm only asked for an answer that is either right or wrong. And in the studio, in the art room, I am asked for my opinion. I am asked about my subjectivity. I am asked how to create instead of how to destroy. And these things then go directly to this notion of people who are put in cages. And she's saying, look what you've lost here. Look what we're sacrificing. Artists and scientists, astronauts, and teachers, all kinds of people, fathers and mothers, and that to her, it's really not necessarily what they end up saying or what they make or what they create, but more about making sure that everyone has that opportunity, because she wants to live in that world. What do you think, Teresita?
I'm just thinking, so I had, when I interviewed Aggie, I think, there are only certain clips that come out in the film, but I think I must have interviewed her for 3 hours, something like that. And I knew other people, and many wonderful people had been interviewing her. And I was like, and Aggie's very stoic. She's just like a hard nut to crack. She'll just look at you, and it would, you're not going to get something for free. And so I kept thinking, the most sort of valuable thing, right, in anything, right, but the most valuable thing here is that how can I get to some core of intimacy here? How can I tease something out of her that's actually not just her public persona or what she says or what's measured, but really like at the heart of it. And I'm just remembering this. Well, I'll tell one anecdote of when I was interviewing her. I kept throwing her these questions that she'd just look at me like, I'm not going for that,
It's true, she made you work.
Very skeptical. And at one point I said, okay, Aggie, so can you remember, I asked her, have you ever cried in front of an artwork? I asked her, can you recall when you were a little girl, can you recall the first time that you felt a sense of empathy, that you actually felt a sense of compassion, and how that manifested in you? Because it's very clear that a lot of these actions that you're doing in the world, they really stem from this very deep sense of compassion, of understanding and locating yourself within something, like your relationship to this bigger thing, like the prison system, right? Which you would think would have nothing to do with you. And I said, can you recall a time when you were a little girl, the first time maybe, where you felt that? And she thought about it, and she said, well, whenever we'd have our dinner, and we'd have we would want to finish our dinner, and we'd have leftover food, and I felt bad about it. And I would tell my brothers, let's go, we should be sending this to China because there are children who don't have any food. And I remember trying to get them to go outside with me and dig a hole to China. This is how little she must have been, right? Like little Aggie thinking about this. And her brothers didn't want to join her. So she went out and she started to dig a hole to China, to share the leftover food that she didn't finish on her plate. And the wonderful thing about this anecdote is sort of like, from a child's mind, the impulse to do this, but then the action, the fact that she's the only one who went out into the garden and started digging the hole, because we know that there, especially right now, there's so much performative action around social justice that is empty, where people aren't locating themselves in the equation on a very personal level. That story really struck me because it spoke to the importance and the power of actually understanding your relationship to these things that could be perceived as being outside of you, but which are inherently a part of your own humanity. And so I love that story about Aggie digging a hole to China.
I have to say, I loved it too, but I have to add that you took that in and you immediately mined the fact that she was also creating this land art, that she was digging this hole, and she was making this artwork, and she was just looking at you like, what? And you were like, but you were making art, you were making something. And then you made these great points, which actually more of your interview appears in the film than other people may know, and even that you may remember, because we took some of her answers, and there's other things going on at other places, and we couldn't introduce back the interview, so we would just take answers and use them over other images or whatever. But you do talk about how that is, women are making things all the time, even when they think they're just taking care of someone, they're just making dinner, they're just making clothes, they're just making a home, a nest, whatever it is, that they're always making. And then you even went further, that is threatening to men and to the status quo and to the system. And, you know, it was beautiful how your interaction with her, your intellectual facility was able to make these connections that really made sense out of some things she'd done in her life.
I also love that quote. I felt that it mirrored, it was a direct quote that mirrored her personality as it comes in the film. This constant making, this constant doing, even with her, and with her gentle, it's like this very, like you said, gentle stoicism, but it's deeply felt and deeply like emotionally tied. And I really appreciated your conversation and how it was in all the conversations and how they took us through and took us to really get to know this person, to come off the pages, you know, to make people real. And that is so hard to do. I can only imagine if there are other stories that were on that cutting room floor, because if there were 3 hours with Teresita, I mean.
Well, I have one more that
I'd love to hear
if I can tell it.
Yes.
But it was about light, and one of Aggie's brothers doesn't see. He's been blind since he was in his early 30s. And that has had a huge impact on her life as such a visual person, a collector of art, as someone whose primary sense, I would say, is her visual sense. And Teresita and Aggie were talking about how Aggie had wanted to collect the old masters. She really loves those pieces. She doesn't know the people, so it wasn't as much of an interest to her because she couldn't get to know the artists. They passed years ago. But she did love the beauty of this work. And she said, but I could never have lived in the dark. And to have old masters on your wall, you can't have a window because they will disappear. They will fade. They will go away. And I wrote down some of what Teresita said during this conversation, because she said, I like that for you, lighting is a metaphor for living, for being alive, that art and your relationship with art helped you find yourself. And she said, is there a time when you felt like you understood yourself because of art? And Teresita said, I, for one, lit a lantern, and that helped me find myself. And my question to Teresita would be that you, as an artist, have lit these lights to help people. I mean, it makes me like emotional, to help people find themselves through basically the light that you are providing to other artists. So that was the level of conversation. And those are the kinds of things that, as beautiful as they were, it was like we had just too many of those from Teresita. So,
but I want to also, you know, to Aggie, to the first thing that was said when you first started introducing this conversation, Melani, which is, you know, this idea that Aggie has these relationships with artists. Aggie collects art. She's like this really important person in the art world, you know, before Art for Justice. And I think, like, sometimes I find that there is a kind of, and this is about Aggie, what I want to say, actually, because she has such a unique ability to really understand what artists are trying to do. There is a kind of, and again, my role tonight is to demystify, there is a kind of fetishizing of both art and artists, as though, you know, everybody loves to, like, you know, use that Baldwin quote where this is the time artists get to work, or, you know, it's this idea, this panacea that, you know, art can create change and art can create social change. And, you know, artists are, you know, they're doing the work, right? But they're kind of like in the background going, I hope they have a plan B, you know, because it's like, it isn't some magic dust that you sprinkle over things and makes everything okay. Now, and I want to clarify this again in the efforts of hoping that anybody listening tonight can find themselves in this and not see any of this as an anomaly, and not think that you have to be a very wealthy person or an artist or any of this, to find yourself in this thing that we're modeling tonight through Aggie. And that is that art actually doesn't change the world, okay? Art does not have that capacity. What artists do when they go into a studio is they hold a mirror to themselves and they look very deeply and they ask very difficult questions and they have nowhere to fall back on. It's just them and the thing that they're making. And then they put that out in the world. And that thing, maybe, if it works, when it works, offers you the capacity to feel something in a way that isn't just reading a manifesto or a label that tells you how you're supposed to feel. Rather, through the artwork, you have the capacity to feel. It prompts you to feel something. Now, what you do with that realization and that feeling is up to you. You know, there's a circuit that needs to be completed there. And I think that that's the part that Aggie understands. And it is so, it's so poignant and so relevant to this conversation that she then takes the artwork that does that and gives it back, right? And so it comes full circle. What she does with the art is precisely what the artist making the art does. You make this thing, you put it out in the world, hoping that it will change someone, maybe even sometimes one thing. And I think about this a lot, right? Because I often think of sometimes the audience for what I'm doing is one person. Like if I can change one person, that means that something has worked, right? It isn't about changing everything. It's that intimate. It's actually that specific sometimes. And what artists do in the studio is they first and foremost try to change themselves. They try to understand themselves. They put that out in the world. And then what people do with it actually requires some work. It requires some looking at yourself within that thing and finding yourself. I keep using the expression locating yourself because it's locating yourself socially. It's locating your privilege. It's locating your whatever thing you have learned from this. It's a sense of compassion. It's a sense of seeing yourself in something that isn't you. That's the root of compassion. And so, you know, the fact that Aggie then sells this Liechtenstein piece, right? The artist is gone. There's no artist anymore. There's just the artwork. Really is like, from an artist's point of view, the ultimate compliment. You know, if everyone who has an artwork of mine would like sell it to somebody else and take the money and create something, even a tiny bit like Art for Justice Fund, the world would literally be a different place. Then art could really change the world. But it isn't. So I want to take a little bit, I want to break it down because sometimes we have these sound bites that we like to repeat to ourselves, like, oh, art can change the world. And it's like, yes, but how? How does art change the world? And what's your relationship to that? And I think that that's a question that each and every one of us needs to be asking ourselves all the time, like all the time, especially at this moment where it is so hard to ignore. You would literally have to be trying to ignore everything that's wrong in the world, to not be prompted and inspired to reach really far in to find your own indignance. You know, like we should all be very indignant at the lack of dignity with which human life is being treated right now.
I would pick up where you left off, but not where you were in the middle, because you were breaking it down and saying, you know, art doesn't change the world, but then at the end you said it does, but how? And I think you gave such a perfect example because, you know, the Liechtenstein changed the world, and so did 13th. And Ava DuVernay's film was put out into the world, and she has talked about this publicly that, you know, I mean, I'm a documentary filmmaker. Who wouldn't want a piece to have that kind of effect and to make that much change, even though it's small change, right? But it's big change.
The point is that the artwork creates change if people are receptive to it. 13 changed the world because people sat through it and listened, but also because it had a way of being seen and distributed and being visible, right? So visibility is also important, right? So it's the full circuit of actually the thing being put out in the world and people being receptive to what it's saying. It's like a conversation, it's like a dialogue. It isn't the art in and of itself. It's not the object of the art in and of itself.
That speaks to the beauty of how all things are connected, because I think sometimes when you are in that world, you may not know that small incident that's happening somewhere else that really changes things. When I read that article about her selling that art piece and coming out of grad school and wondering if art connected to justice and being in Baltimore, Maryland, and all that was happening, and seeing this woman sell this piece and create this art justice fund, and seeing what, how people, kind of thought it was crazy, and how she went in and really moved things. It was a pivotal point for me where I was saying, you know what, this work does matter. And that's like a small blip on the screen, but there were several small blips on the screen that when you see that and you're like, oh, this person over here actually has connected to what's happening in my everyday life, then we all can connect to it in a way. And it's absolutely beautiful and inspiring and important. And like you said, sometimes the sound bites, when we do these interviews, we're so used to preparing for them. We have to remember those little moments that you will never see and never know are changing people in ways that we can't imagine. And it was beautiful to hear Ava DuVernay speak of that. And I'm sure there's so many other moments. And how do you even go about like this legacy that is beyond legacy? And I love also the fact that it's connected to artists that are here, that are working. How do you continue to collect the stories, take the stories, bring the stories in? Because I'm sure there's so many. Like, what are there next steps to make these connections even more visible in ways that we maybe have not even imagined?
I think that's a beautiful question, because to me, the film, along the lines of what Teresita is talking about, is really a diving board. Like, it's just a platform to continue these conversations. And as art, for me as an artist, my medium is in addition to pottery and COVID, is filmmaking. And I think of Maya Angelou's quote all the time, which is, people will not remember, from meeting you, people will not remember what you said or what you did, but they will always remember how you made them feel. And we know that to be a fact, right? We're old enough that we come across people we knew when we were younger. We can't remember why or what we did together, but we do remember if they're, on the friendly side or on the other side. And I feel like that with the film, even though I have these beautiful remnants that maybe should be a book or something else, but weren't part of this movie, what I wanted in the film was just that sense. I think people come away with a feeling about Teresita, with a feeling about Tenzin, and they certainly come away with a feeling about Aggie. And so I don't need them to know what year she was born and where she went to school, and the names of her brothers, things like that. I just need them to have that feeling so that hopefully they'll take it into their lives and try to make sense in a similar way.
I love that. Yeah. Teresita, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, because the word, when you said the word imagination, it made me think of a couple of things. And correct me if I'm wrong, Kat, but the whole story, from the selling of the artwork to the creating of the Art for Justice Fund, is such a radical act of imagining, right? Mm-hmm. And I wanted to just go there for a second and talk about the importance of that, because that is what artists do. In fact, I remember going to studio in a school which I'm assuming everybody just saw the film, right? And knows that Studio in the School was founded by Aggie, 40 something years ago, and that most New York City public school kids basically have a sense of art because of Studio in the School. That's how big its impact is and how long it's been going on. But one of the I visited a very, very disenfranchised school in the Bronx with studio in the school, and spoke to a group of mostly Black and Brown Latinx kids, many of whom English was not their first language, many who came from families that were not documented. And it was such an incredible and inspiring experience. And one of the things that I told them, which I could tell them and I could say now to us as adults, to our audience, had a lot to do with imagination, because the way that we've been sort of conditioned to think is that all the important stuff, the social justice and the political and the intellectual, the rigorous thinking is over here, and then all the beautiful things and imagination and all these other things are over there, as though these things have to coexist, as though we live in this sort of binary world. And what I told these kids was, never let anybody tell you that, because beauty and imagination is one of the most powerful tools that we have to think about things like social justice. One of the things that I love so much about Art for Justice, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kat, this is what I was going to say, is that it was conceived as, I believe, a 5-year project experiment, so that more of the funding would be given all at once or in a short amount of time. And I think that that's an example of this idea that we have to be able to imagine that in 5 years or in 10 years, we won't need this anymore, because we will have changed the world.
That is exactly right. And hopefully that's an element that people do take away from the film, which is an understanding of the uniqueness and the power and the rationale behind having a 5-year spend down, that this fund was not created to become an endowment that would last forever. If you're going to end mass incarceration, you want to end it. You don't want to be paying to end it, years down the line. I think it was also a recognition of the very important leadership of formerly incarcerated people who are cycling in and out of this oppressive system, to the point where we have over 2 million people now inside and over 4 million people under supervision, which in many cases means they can't vote, people who are on parole and probation. And so I think that it's important, Teresita, and I know you will appreciate this, is that I think without maybe voicing it as such, it is an act of reparations to put the $100 million into the field immediately, and not to sit there and see oneself, herself, or her and me, or her and me and Darren and Ava, as the people who should be deciding where these little bits and pieces of money go, but rather to put the money into the field, let the formerly incarcerated leaders, the artists and advocates, the lawyers, the teachers, make the decisions about how those resources can be best deployed to achieve the goal of ending mass incarceration and creating really substantive criminal justice reform that may even be headed towards abolition.
And that kind of boldness, it's those kind of themes in the film that are these quiet undertones. And the largest one is audacity, boldness, and how do we take that into our own lives? What are some other examples of how to move forward this initiative, or what people are doing what have people done with the money? And are there other films or other things that we may not know about? I know we know about Ava, we know about this film, but are there other projects that we may not, immediately connect it to?
There aren't films per se, but there are incredible projects that at the beginning of Art for Justice, in addition to being a 5-year spend down, part of the uniqueness was an effort to bring together artists and activists. And it was called Uniting Artists and Activists, in this effort to change the narrative, to move the culture towards a culture that did acknowledge the multiplicity of voices, that did repair the harm created by the legacy of slavery, that did move forward to a more just and egalitarian society by acknowledging the past, dealing with the hurt and the harm, and moving forward with a vision that the artist can bring. And sorry to idealize the artist, Teresita, I know I do that sometimes, but I think what I've found, because we're already 3.5, 4 years in, is that instead of just uniting artists and activists, the activists are identifying as artists and the artists are identifying as activists. And that it's not about bringing different people together, it's about bringing our full selves, our full capacities, our imagination to the work of changing this narrative. And one example, because you asked for good examples, one really timely example, of course, is Desmond Meade in Florida, who is a leader who is formerly incarcerated, came out. We invested a lot of funding early on into a ballot measure he was putting forward in Florida to make sure that formerly incarcerated people, and particularly people with felony convictions, could vote. Because in Florida it said you could never be re-enfranchised, which is ridiculous. You served your time, you were given a sentence, you're done. You can now participate in society. If not, what are we doing when we send people away? It's a death sentence. It's being sentenced to death in prison, as Brian Stevenson talks about life sentences. So what happened was it went before the Florida people, and over 75% voted and said that they wanted to be sure that the 1.4 million people in Florida who were disenfranchised could have their vote. And of course, the right wing smashed back and said that everyone had to pay their fines and fees before they could vote, which is a poll tax, which is very backward thinking and also, frankly, illegal and unconstitutional, that you have to pay to be able to vote. And so instead of the doom and gloom that, of course, I was like, what the heck? And he said, you know, it's okay if people have to do community service, they can come do community service with me. And we will have them go out to other formerly incarcerated people and help register them to vote, because there's no one better to talk to formerly incarcerated people than other formerly incarcerated people. And so it's fine, because it's actually going to help the work that we need to do. That, to me, is about imagination, creative problem solving, things that most of our young people, and women artists, people in prison, all the people that Aggie has said do not have a voice, are not able to look at their own problem solving skills, are not able to apply critical thinking or to present their own subjectivity. That is the creativity we need to resource and invest in as a community. I think if anything we've learned from COVID is that there aren't philanthropists, and you started out with this, Melani, there aren't philanthropists and other people, but in fact we all can participate in mutual aid because everyone has something to bring to the table. And so I think there are a lot of examples among the grantees in the beloved community, among the fellows and the Art for Justice grantee partners, who have brought together those kinds of artist and activist moves in the same place.
That reminds me of what you were saying about the light and loving the light and how just shining whatever light you have on some of these issues and almost using light as a plug to give things power. And it's such important work. There was an underlying theme in this movie and that of women and motherhood. That it never was directly spoken about, but it was just this clear presence of the importance of the work that women do as women and as mothers. Did you want to speak to any part of that at all, or how does that show up for you?
Well, I have a lot to say about that because I made a movie about my mother, but I would like to involve Teresita and her particular brilliance in being a mother, but also being a partner to me as a co-mother, and also even to Aggie. And Teresita, I don't know if you want to speak about the conversation you had with Aggie about representation and being able to see oneself and how important that is for our own children, to be able to see themselves, and how that teaches us to know that everyone, whether they're our children or not, need to see themselves. Do you want to speak about that?
I don't remember exactly the context for that particular thing. I mean, I can speak to that.
You were speaking about Dahlia if you want to, but you were saying how important it was for different people and a lot of our children, all of our children.
What's interesting is that, and so this is it's two-part thing, right? So I met Kat through Aggie at an annual women's luncheon that Aggie used to host. And you'd go to this thing that was maybe 80, I don't know, 60, 80 of anyone you can imagine in the art world, women artists mostly.
All women artists.
All women artists,
yeah.
From like, 80 to like 25. And so you'd be in this room and I would be seeing women that were like textbook artists that I studied. And I'd be, oh my God, I can't believe I'm meeting Mary Miss or whomever. And then there would be like somebody much younger than me meeting me. So there was this entire, there was this intergenerational solidarity and ability to, and a forum really for meeting other women that sort of revolves, I think, around Aggie as this axis, because she makes these things happen. And what would happen is you'd be in a room with people that you probably should have met, but would have never met, because maybe you had different kinds of access or, just different kinds of access. We're just that simple, right? And one of the things that I love about not just Aggie, but the whole family really is that there is no hierarchy. There's this sense that like you are part of a group of people, and you could meet people from all different walks of life. And in that way, very much this bridging and this idea of liminal spaces that I think both Aggie and Kat bridge very beautifully and very authentically for so many people. Like the crossroads are really like them. First and foremost, I think that the film is such an intimate and complex look at this mother-daughter relationship between Aggie and Kat. It's so clear and it's so palpable that Aggie is who she is because of Kat, and Kat is who she is because of Aggie. And it isn't like to romanticize it, because it's not like it's this like little tale that's being put out there. It's actually full of like a lifetime of understanding one another and respecting one another. There's a whole lot of respect too, and a lot of differences, right? Like in many ways, these women are so different, right? But there's this intimacy, this mother-daughter intimacy it's such a wonderful part of the film, because in many ways, I really think that Kat is the only person who could have made this film, and who has a sense of the underlying person that Aggie is, that allows her to be this person in public that performs all these acts and puts all these good things in the world and does all this philanthropy. But where does that come from? And so the film really helps us to understand someone on a much more subjective human level, and how it is that you get to be that person. Like how do you become that person? I think too that intergenerational quality extends to this whole kind of network of primarily women that are involved with you, Kat, with the way that you make films, with Aggie herself. I remember somebody interviewing Aggie says, "What's the one exhibition that's never been done? What would you do if somebody gave you right now, MoMA to curate whatever?" And she just looks at the camera and she just says, "Big women's art," or women's big art.
Women's large artwork.
Women's large art. Right? And so Aggie's got your back. Like she's a woman's woman. She's got your back, and she's always thinking of other women. And so there is this spirit of continuum, of community and solidarity amongst lots of different kinds of women who may normally not see as themselves as having a whole lot to do with one another. That intersects sort of at Kat and Aggie, at least for me. And now one of the wonderful things is that as our own children get older, we see them really being this sort of like extended continuum, really, of how it is that, since the beginning of time, mothers have grappled with their daughters and daughters with their mothers, and then they have sort of found themselves and grown out of these relationships, and then these rites of passage that you create with your own children, and so I think that sense of intimacy is so much needed, but also that way of looking at the world and creating art and creating films is so radically different than the competitive, domineering sort of authoritative voice that we're so conditioned to hear. And in that sense, there is a very subtle and quiet and powerful feminine and feminist radicality in the underlying structure, like what I call the kind of social structure that this film has created, which is like the behind the scenes thing that you may not see in the film. That thing is still alive, like that thing is growing and growing and expanding beyond the actual film itself. So all really important things, and all very deliberate things, I should add, that have a whole lot to do with Kat's vision as a brilliant filmmaker in her own right, not just Aggie's daughter, but someone who is an award-winning filmmaker who is able to also move through these liminal spaces in such a brilliant and effective way. I would say that Kat is really the person who brings so many different communities together in her projects, in her home, and in her place in the world, in all of the sort of different scales, whether it be, familial or in these much larger systems that we all have to participate in as well.
I'm so glad that you brought up the quote where she was talking about what work would she want to see that show. When she said that it felt like a love letter to all women artists to take up more space, to be more, to do more, to connect more. Are there other moments or other things that she may have said that also would be in that love letter? Because the movie, and I wanted to say this, Kat, like, I cannot even imagine. I love my mom dearly, and I can't imagine what it would take to do what you did. And I mean, because it is very well done, and it is beautifully done, and you took up space, and you allowed space and connected more, and really showed that wide community that Teresita speaks of. And the whole movie was a love letter. But is there anything else that you would want to add to any footnotes to the love letter?
I've only recently come to terms with the fact that it was a love letter. I was so hell-bent that this was not going to be a biographical film about, like a chronological portrait, that it wasn't really about my mother, that it was about art for justice and the messaging and the goals of that work. And since its release, I have really come to realize what a love letter it is, and to value the potential of what that means, which is that it is about me and it is about her, but if it's about love, that's something that's valuable for anybody. And that I can tell this very precise, small story in the interest of shedding light, making sense of the much bigger one. And it wasn't really until a few days ago when a friend said, if your children, I have 4 grown and teenage children like Teresita, has the same age children, and they said, if your children made a film about you, what would you want in it? And it was really, it was a dramatic moment, because I thought, well, first of all, I would not allow that. They could not possibly, like, you don't want someone to, and someone who knows you, but there was this sense that I think was important of realizing the level of trust she had in me. And I think Teresita just spoke beautifully to that, which is that it wasn't this sort of, I think we all kind of use this term unconditional love that you might receive from your parent, if you're lucky, or from someone, unconditional love is this goal. It was really experienced more from me as a trust and as a kind of loyalty, and just a belief in me that is so profound that I didn't know while I was making it or any time before that. But since it came out, and it was because I asked her after I finished it, because I didn't want her to say, we're making a movie, I don't want to do that, stop the presses. So I didn't want to jinx it or give her an opportunity to end it. So I waited till it was all done and released, and I said to her, in all honesty and wanting a real answer, why did she let me do it? And she said, because you asked. And there was this part of me that, just realized that she believed in me. And I think that it was the biggest lesson that she's given me as a parent and as a person, which is to say, how can I keep growing and changing in my love for you while never sacrificing any element of its stability or its force or its persistence or its support and guidance. That she would ask questions. She asked me questions just like she asked Teresita questions. She'll ask anybody questions, but it doesn't mean that she doesn't trust you and respect you and want to stay on the path with you. And I think for an 80-year-old at any decade, but an 80-year-old right now, which is what we're looking at, someone who is alive in the 30s in this country and the 40s and the 50s, for her to be able to have a conversation with Teresita and I about the binaries of gender and the orientation versus preference in sexuality of even feminism or the nuances of race. When Teresita poses questions to her that are very different than her African American children, that have to do with what will it take for a museum to actually reflect Latinx people's experience in this country, which is a range of experiences that she needs to consider the wide range of what that would mean, not only in terms of colorism, which she encounters with her children, some of whom are biracial and some of whom are darker skinned, what is colorism, but what does it mean to be Latinx, and why is there something about the Latinx experience in this country that is less able to be embraced by the monolith than, saying, Latin America? Those are questions that she's willing to grapple with. And to me, that's what I aspire to do. We know we don't have the answers. The question is, do we have the right questions? And she's all about questions.
Yeah, I love that Aggie's never never embarrassed to be herself. And I love that. Because is she 80, 81?
She's 82 now.
82.
She turned 82 in COVID.
And Aggie was one of the first people. My elder daughter is transgender, and I have two daughters. And Aggie was one of the first people that I told. We were just at a dinner table together, and she was asking, how are the kids? And I told her, and it's so strange because I didn't even have that kind of openness with my own family, necessarily my mother, let's say, who's younger than Aggie. But Aggie she's an incredible listener, and she just isn't judgmental. And so she listens because what she knows is that she doesn't understand everything. And so she does something that is such a great lesson for really for anybody, but she gets over herself, right? It's not about her discomfort. It's not about her discomfort. It's about the fact that there may be something that she doesn't quite understand. And she's going to listen to you, and she might be skeptical, and she might have questions, and she might be awkward, but she's going to get past her own discomfort in order to grow and in order to and in Aggie's case, in order to almost immediately when she understands something, where she goes to is well, that's not right. How come we don't do anything about that? Well, that needs to change. Is there anything we can do to change that? And that is the really wonderful thing about this woman, is that in many ways it is her mind is so open to all of these possibilities that are not the things that she was conditioned to believe, that she is able to be incredibly effective, because what she does is she actually, she doesn't take it personally. She makes these things about something that are bigger than the fact that she may or may not get it, right? And the thing that always clicks with her is when something doesn't seem like it's fair, or like it's just. And she speaks about a lot about that invisibility. Where is it? Why don't we know this? She'll say things like, well, why don't we know this? I remember when Standing Rock was happening, and we were at a dinner together, and she just was like, she just doesn't know a whole lot about this, but she knows there's something wrong, and it bothers her almost immediately. And this is the thing that's so special about her, and this spirit that I think that people of all ages should aspire to. And that is, it's something really quite unique in her. She's just wired a certain way that makes her very receptive.
I got lost for a moment in just the beauty of you all's responses, and I really just appreciate this conversation. And I know that there's so many people in our audience that are touched by this work, by the work that you all do. Please tell our audience, how do we continue to follow your work and to follow everything that you're creating? So Teresita, how do we find more and about what you're doing in your art?
I have a show that opens in New York City in November 12th at my gallery, Lehman Maupin, and my mid-career retrospective is up at the Phoenix Art Museum right now.
Okay. Great. We'll make sure that we share that. I'll reach out to you about some links so we can share that with our audience in our next newsletter. And Catherine, how do we continue to follow the work that you're doing?
Well, aggiefilm.com, and the film is now in national theaters nationwide, at-home theaters, which is new. We're trying to adapt to the current situation. So there are, if you live in Cleveland, there's 2 movie theaters. You click on their website, and you can watch the film that way. It's also going to be on Amazon Prime and iTunes starting Friday in a couple days. So we hope people will watch the film, but we've spent the quarantine and the lockdown and the uprising time developing a lot of strategies to continue the work. And one of them is a discussion guide, which got posted to our website on Wednesday to help you, whether you're home or doing a Zoom organization in women's groups or student groups or whatever it is. There's also a syllabus. There's now a wonderful professor, Andrea Hueso at Georgetown, who will be teaching a course in the spring called Art and Justice that uses the Aggie film as the original text of the course, which is thrilling to me. And then I actually have the prototype of our game, which Teresita has played, which is called Words of Art.
Oh,
and it
wow.
is going to be, you can pre-order it now. It's being sold by Penguin Random House. It's on Amazon and on all the whatever, Barnes and Nobles. And Teresita has a piece in here, and it really extends, I think, a lot of the thinking of the film, because it says, use art to figure out how you feel and how to talk about your visions, and not necessarily fact-based. It's not about knowing the names of the artists or the names of the pieces, but it's about sort of playing a looking game. There's 150 pieces from Aggie's collection, and you play this game sort of like apples to apples, and you say words and then you put them down, and you look at your cards and you think about how you feel about things, and you really learn a lot, I think, about yourself and about the people that you're playing with. But again, it's a visual literacy effort. It's something that just says, how can we mine this other dimension?
It's a game of intuition for sure.
A game of what?
It's a game of intuition.
Yes.
Or
And I think Aggie's all about intuition, and she's about really sort of educating the intuition to trust it.
What a wonderful extension of this work. I'm looking forward to seeing this game, playing it, and then also following your work, Teresita. If there's anything that we can do to continue to share with our audience about this and any other projects you all have, please always keep us in mind. Then send us stuff so we can share it, because they are thoroughly excited and ready. We have a very active, engaged audience. And I hope that we can continue this conversation at another time. And so I won't say closing notes. I'll just say continuing moments, and that may this moment lead to other moments with each other and with our own power in the world. And thank you all so much for this. And thank you to our audience for joining us. And I hope that we would love to hear from you and tell us more about your experience and your viewing of Aggie. It'll be up for a few more days if you want to experience it, and then also watch this conversation again. And for tonight and for many nights, thank you and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Teresita.
Thanks, Kat. Bye-bye.